Well, welcome everybody. I see we still have people joining, but we're going to get rolling. Got a really great audience tonight and a great panel, something we're really excited about as we kick off Black History Month in February, thinking about the DEI Corporate Leaders panel tonight. And we're in really, really great hands because Dr. Andre Churchwell is going to be leading our panel discussion tonight. Dr. Churchwell is the Vice Chancellor for Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion and the Chief Diversity Officer for Vanderbilt University. I could say so many things about Andre. He's a professor of medicine and cardiology, professor of radiology, professor of biomedical engineering, on and on. Over 30 years of dedication to furthering diversity in all realms across the academy, from undergraduates to graduates, to professional schools like the Owen School. And he indeed has been a great friend of the Owen School, has spoken to our students on numerous occasions, our staff, our faculty, and really been part of our community. And of course, a special piece of Andre is his daughter is an Owen MBA alum here in Nashville. So we really feel in so many ways that Andre is part of the Owen family. I'm going to turn it over to Professor Churchwell to introduce his panel. Andre.
Eric, thank you so much. Thanks for inviting me to moderate this session. This is really an important time here. I've been thinking about this for the past few weeks, and we're clearly in the midst of an inflection point here in this country around the history of freedom, justice, fairness, equity. That equity word will be coming up again and again, whether it be justice equity, educational equity, all types of equity, health equity, the kind of thing I deal with. And it's so important in our country. But looking at the panel gives me great confidence to see that we have an emerging generation of leaders on this panel, younger than I am for sure, who are committed to positive change and an upward trajectory from that inflection point upwards towards social justice and moral justice. As MLK said, the arc of the moral universe bends, but it has to go up first. And so we're coming out of that inflection point based on the strength of these great people that we've trained here at Owen. DEI, or diversity, equity, and inclusion. You might hear me get that mixed up. I think of it as equity, diversity, inclusion. We'll just say DEI so I don't mess it up. Leaders must be part of the processes in our firms and our institutions of higher education to offer direction and clarity of purpose during these turbulent times. To see our Owen grads out there making positive change in history, and at the same time offering some solace to us through these great challenges we face in this moment in America, and I dare say the world, the great leaders that are being produced by Owen are changing the world in a very positive way and will help us move out of that inflection point towards an upward curve and upward trajectory. Full disclosure, as Eric said, I am super partial to the Owen Business School. My daughter, Crystal Churchwell Evans, now married, 2 years, a successful graduate and leads the development office at the Frisch Art Museum here in Nashville. So she may be on the call tonight. Hey, Princess. Now to our purpose tonight. We have a number of great panelists here and some great questions that come from yours truly, as well as that were offered by you guys out there in the community. We'll offer this to our panel members. Our panel members are members of the pragmatic group of people out in the field working in DEI and corporate America. And we also have a member of the Academy from our own school faculty here. I'll begin by asking Michele to introduce herself. She's an MBA grad of 1993.
And excited to be here. Hello, good evening. I'm Michele Ivey Frazier. I am actually a Nashville native. That's not common sometimes these days, and grew up in the North Nashville community. I received my bachelor's of business administration from the University of Montevallo in Montevallo, Alabama, and started kind of in this DEI role early on. I served as the first African-American student body president at the University of Montevallo, and proud of that. I then, of course, went on to get my MBA from Vanderbilt's Owen School of Management with concentrations in both marketing and human resources. And from there, I delved into the world of cable television and worked with Viacom Cable and Intermedia to bring digital television to Nashville along with fiber optic technology. Most recently, I had the privilege of spending several years in healthcare and retired from a family-owned business, but quickly realized that I was not done. So from there, I was fortunate to join the team at Music City Baseball, where I lead diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives for the organization. And that work has also led to the joy of being on the board of directors for the Nashville LGBT Chamber. And I like that work, obviously, as well. A shameless plug here, if those don't know about Music City Baseball, we're an organization working to bring a Major League Baseball team to Nashville. So I encourage all of those baseball fans out there that if you have a passion and interest in bringing Major League Baseball to Nashville, then I do extend an invitation for you guys to visit our website and also to follow us on social media. Thank you so much to Owen and Vanderbilt and everyone here for giving me an opportunity to talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and I'm definitely looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you so much, Michele, and we're all looking forward for free tickets at some point here. So thank you.
Let's get it here first. Thank you.
There you go. Moving on to Chandra Vassar, graduate of Owen School 1997. Chandra.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for the invitation to come here tonight and speak with you about DEI and the great things that we're doing at Nissan. Again, my name is Chandra Vassar. I am currently Vice President and Chief Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Officer at Nissan. I also serve as the president of our Nissan Foundation. I have been with Nissan for about 17 years now. Most of my career was spent on the operations side of the business and finance and purchasing. Throughout my career, I've had the opportunity to get involved with DEI and DEI initiatives. So that is what, landed me where I am today. I have an MBA from Vanderbilt's Owen Graduate School of Management. Prior to that, I got my undergraduate degree in accounting from Tennessee State University. After finishing my MBA, I did move to Michigan and worked at General Motors Delphi. Then I left automotive, went into telecom, and then found my way back to the automotive industry. So I'm very excited to be here this evening and hope that I am able to share some very insightful information with you.
Thank you so much, Chandra. Appreciate that. And now we have someone from the Academy, one of our own, Owen faculty member, María del Carmen Triana. María.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody. It's great to be here. And as was mentioned, María Triana from originally from Cuba and then from Texas and kind of all over. So like the other panelists here, Michele and Chandra, I've worked in several different places and I eventually made my way out to corporate and then back to academia. So my undergraduate degree is in business from the University of Texas at Austin. And then I moved on to get an MBA at the University of Arizona. And from there, I spent several years in the corporate world at Intel Corporation, where I was a project manager and systems analyst. And I have to say, I learned a lot. And I also decided that just wasn't the right fit for me. And so at that point, pretty much everybody in my family is a teacher in some level or another. And I think it's in my blood probably. So I got the curiosity to go back to school so that I could teach and also become a researcher and study a lifelong passion in diversity and discrimination. And so that's what I did. I went back to Texas A&M University, the most horrible rival of Texas Austin at the time, but that was the best choice, where the people were doing really interesting research on diversity and discrimination. So I have my PhD from Texas A&M. From there, I got on the faculty at the University of Wisconsin in Madison, where I was for 12 years. And then during that time, I wrote a book on diversity and inclusion, which I use now at Vanderbilt. This is my second year on the faculty at Vanderbilt as a professor, and I'm teaching a class on diversity and inclusion as well as human resources. And I also teach a class on people analytics. So several different things, all very interesting and all related to people. So I'm delighted to be here with everybody and to have a lively conversation and also learn from my fellow panelists who have a lot of industry experience. Looking forward to it.
Thank you so much. Well, you can see we have an energetic group here. So we have some pragmatists who are involved in the delivery of DEI for their companies and their firms. And then we have someone from the academy who's been in the area of industry, but now has a vision of education and research. So we will have tailored questions that will be able to meet out and tease out some of the expertise in front of us here tonight. Let's start with a general question, and that's for beginning with Michele and then Chandra. How did you get into the DEI business itself? Can you tell us about your kind of trajectory there?
Sure, I'm happy to. You know, as I mentioned in my introduction, I had the fortune to start with Music City Baseball. It was an organization that started out with a commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion. I really lucked out with that one. It was very early on that they started with identifying that having diverse investors was important for the organization. Having a DEI charter was important. Having a DEI committee was important. And they did that from day one, basically. And also their brand. Music City Baseball, when we get the franchise, will be called the Nashville Stars. The Nashville Stars actually recognizes the Negro League team that played here in Nashville in the 40s and 50s. And in addition to that, you know, we have a diverse board as well. So once again, very fortunate to find an organization that was, you know, already committed to diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts. I actually started in operations based upon the operations that I did in healthcare, but was able to shift to my passion of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And again, I'm very fortunate to be able to do that. Now, my work really includes developing relationships, community partnerships with organizations, including the Nashville Black Chamber of Commerce, the Nashville Hispanic Chamber. And again, as I mentioned, building those relationships has led to me being able to serve on the board of directors with the LGBT Chamber. And obviously I get to make hopefully a good difference in the area of DEI and working with them as well. You know, people ask me advice about getting involved in the DEI space. And I often say that identify your bandwidth. This is not an easy area to work within. So I always encourage people to kind of understand your bandwidth. And when you're talking with organizations, interview them as much as they're interviewing you. You know, make sure that their visions of DEI align with, you know, what you envision DEI to be, and also your passion. You know, everyone has different levels of passion when it comes to DEI. So you want to make sure that the organization fits within, you know, your passion there as well. And the other thing that I always encourage people to do is read, and read some more. And also read articles and books that you normally would not read, that are not within your comfort zone, that are not about cultures and experiences that you already come from. So hopefully when you do that, you know, that knowledge will be a powerful tool, and you need to look for an organization that truly appreciates that skill set that you'll be able to bring from learning about DEI perspectives from different areas.
Great. Thank you. Chandra, can you share us your journey? Like what was it that got you into thinking about DEI as a career or interest or passion?
Oh, absolutely. So actually my exposure to DEI started in about 2006. I was at the time working for Nissan as a senior financial analyst, and I had the opportunity to join Nissan's diversity cross-functional team. And we had a number of cross-functional teams with which basically bring together employees from multiple functions to solve business issues. So at that time, you know, we did not have anything like employee resource groups. We didn't have a diversity recruiting strategy. So the team that I was a part of proposed three major initiatives. One was employee resource groups, which we did receive approval for. And at the time of the approval, our chairman said, I want you to run a pilot of a women's employee resource group. So we ran that pilot, and now we have 10 thriving employee resource groups at Nissan, which we call business synergy teams. The second initiative was a diversity recruiting strategy, which we have not necessarily been as consistent with that, but certainly something that we are really focused on making part of our story when we talk about DEI. And the third was the formation of a corporate diversity council. At the time that I was on the committee, we didn't quite get approval for that, but we did eventually form a corporate diversity council and still have a thriving council today. When I was a part of Nissan, at one point, I became the chairperson of our career development committee for our finance employees. And I basically talk the talk and walk the walk, which basically means that I made sure that as we recruited employees or non-employees, interns into our program, which is the primary pipeline for our entry-level hiring, always consider diversity. So, one of the things that I like to highlight is the fact that we created a very diverse and inclusive program. As we were looking at hiring, we looked at different universities, as well as ensuring that we brought in people from diverse backgrounds, cultures, and experiences. Also at Nissan, I participated in a multicultural acceleration team. Later in my career, once I was around the senior manager level. And really the goal of that team was to make sure that we focus on continuing to grow our sales with our multicultural consumer base, which right now we have one of the most multicultural consumer bases in the automotive industry, with about 40% of our sales to multicultural consumers. I also participated in diversity recruiting through our National Black MBA Association relationship, supported other diversity initiatives of the company, including our partnership with Youth About Business, 100 Black Men in Inroads. And then in 2014, I was promoted to purchasing director. And one of my responsibilities there was supplier diversity. So that was when I started to really get into, how we improve diversity of our supply base at Nissan. And, I built a supplier diversity team. That team worked very tirelessly to create a diversity strategy. And ultimately, within a couple of years of creating the team and the strategy, we were awarded Corporation of the Year by the Tri-States Minority Supplier Development Council. So we really made some good progress there. And I became a member of the Corporate Diversity Council, which all of that eventually led to me being appointed to my current position. And really for this current position, our strategy is really built upon 3 pillars: our people, our culture, and our partners. And from a people standpoint, our focus is really on embedding DEI people leader best practices in our hiring and our promotions and training. From a culture perspective, we are really focused on ensuring that employees have the opportunity to speak up without fear. And we do that through some inclusive conversations. And ultimately, we know that as our employees are more engaged and they don't have that fear of speaking up, it really fosters more ideas and creativity, which ultimately leads to better business results for Nissan. And finally, from a partner standpoint, really the focus is on taking action to be transparent and equitable by giving or opening up opportunity for external partners to collaborate with Nissan. So whether that's looking at our marketing spend, looking at our dealer body to ensure that there's diversity there, as well as our supply base and our philanthropic efforts as well.
Great. I've got a lot of stuff that's coming in. There are questions popping up, but I'm gonna kind of round that particular question up with just a comment from my own background. I'm about twice the age of everybody on this call here. So I was around during the time of integration of the schools. And so being someone who went from college, from Vandy to med school, we saw the need, and maybe medicine and healthcare is just that kind of thing. You see health disparities, and that means you have to reach back and pull people up. But also along the way, we recognized there was a dearth of people, lack of African Americans in medicine or Hispanics in medicine. So I became engaged in wanting to pull down and bring people up. And in doing so, that's kind of the initial taste and involvement in diversity and inclusion that kind of stimulates us all, to reach down and bring people up who should be brought up and should be given an opportunity and not be excluded because of color, race, gender, or gender identity. So that's spectacular. I'm going to come back to EAGs and come back to supply diversity in a little bit, but I'm going to move on to the next question. And how has the pandemic and the rise of racism post George Floyd changed your job, Chandra?
Well, I would say that prior to those events, we really had a very small diversity organization that was embedded in our HR function. That organization consisted of roughly 2 individuals, and their primary focus was on managing external relationships and employee resource groups. So there wasn't a full kind of devoted effort in the company. After those events occurred, our Nissan America's chairperson wanted to hear from the Black employee population. He wanted to hear about their experiences and just learn about their expectations of how Nissan should act following those very unfortunate events. So he participated in a series of small chats or listening sessions with the employees. He gave the employees an opportunity to be completely transparent. They were very transparent, discussed the impact of those events as well as police brutality in their daily lives. They talked about what seemed to be an inconsistent approach to DEI. They talked about the fact that we really lack diversity in our C-suite, as well as, it didn't appear we were truly as dedicated as we might say, because we just didn't devote the resources to DEI. So I think all of that feedback from the employees, as well as, the events that we saw, really drove the creation for Nissan of our first ever C-suite Chief Diversity Officer position, with a direct reporting line to our chairperson, rather than what we had before, which was an organization that was embedded in HR. And as we know, especially for a large corporation like a Nissan, DEI is more than just the internal employee aspect. It touches the employees, absolutely, but there's also those external facing impacts as well. When you think about our suppliers and our marketing spend, as well as our dealer body, which is the interface that customers have to Nissan. We also established some strategy sessions with a cross-functional, cross-regional, cross-country group of employees, ranging from top executives down to even analysts. And we coined those disruption days. And really the point of those meetings was to disrupt our traditional approach to DEI and to really develop our voice from a DEI standpoint. So we created a very clear North Star, which is something that basically is our tagline or message for how we see DEI. We also created a philosophy, a strategy, and a roadmap. And there was really just a clear message and support from the top. So even our other senior executives also participated in small group chats and listening sessions and inclusive conversations.
Great. One of the concerns those of us that have been in the space have had is that we've seen with major events, turbulence in society, we see some upheavals where there is a transient increase in EDI activities. We saw that after the death of, unfortunately, of MLK and also Robert F. Kennedy in '68, but those things were not sustained. You get a sense this is more sustained in the wake of George Floyd and the like. And I'll let Chandra comment, and then Michele, what do you think about that too before I move on to María?
Yeah, I think that we will see this more sustained just because there's a different focus, right? I think there's been a lot of pressure on organizations that, you've had diversity initiatives in the past, they weren't sustainable. Maybe there was just window dressing. Maybe you created a chief diversity officer position, but that person didn't have a team. The strategies didn't necessarily get pushed deep into the organization, or you kind of left it with your DEI office or your HR department to move the needle on diversity. And so one thing, at Nissan, we know that, we can't rest this with HR or just the DEI office. The message is we all own DEI. And so we're really focused on driving our overarching America's region strategy down to the lowest level, down throughout our various functions, and ensuring that our employees truly feel or see the change that we are saying that we are going to do. So I think there's a lot of best practices out there. We're certainly following those best practices and using that to implement sustainable change in our organization.
Yeah, it's important for the white leadership of these organizations to be equally invested in the training on bias or unconscious bias or conscious bias, or training around anything that you're doing to try to bring more inclusive hiring. The leadership just can't say, hey, you go off and do that, Chandra. They have to be involved, just as you're describing it. That's spectacular. Michele, any comments on that?
I do. 3 things I wrote that came to mind off the top of my head. One, I think people feel more empowered, and I think that when people feel more empowered, then, their voices are louder and they demand more in the area of diversity, equity, and inclusion. I think there are more resources available. And I think that's helping a lot to hopefully sustain the work in this field. And then I think people are starting to realize that it just makes good business sense, right? I think that people, and I hate to say it in a way, but I'm also not afraid to say that it just makes good business sense. It's not only the right thing to do, but there are clear indications and clear case studies that show that when organizations are focused on diversity, equity, and inclusion, it directly affects their bottom line.
Boy, you just segued me right to María. Boy, you just teed me up there. So María, as our person who studies this in a deep way, there's always a debate. Is there a better moral case for EDI in a corporation? Is there a better business case? Can you talk about that? And then tell us, do you think that that the employee affinity groups actually are effective in building a sense of community within these giant organizations? Is there any information on that, please?
Okay, well, I'll start with the first question. Is there evidence that diversity is good for organizations? Is there a moral case as well as a business case? And I would say the answer is yes to both. So the moral case, I think we all are familiar with, right, in terms of ethics and equal opportunity, and frankly, learning. And I think that learning component where different people can learn from one another, and in doing so, they become better. That's really part of the culture that then actually leads you to do better as an organization. So the research is not unanimous in this area. If you look at the research across the field, you will find roughly half of the time you find positive effects on organizational productivity and performance, and half the time you find negative effects on organizational productivity and performance. When you put it all together in meta-analytic studies that attempt to look at every study that's ever been done and come up with a true population effect, you come up with roughly no effect. And that's had people frustrated and scratching their heads for a few decades now. And so the reason why is because of all of the things that Chandra in particular just alluded to when she was talking about Nissan and the way that they set up their DE&I initiatives in the organization and tried to really make a cultural shift or a cultural transformation to value DE&I and not just pinpoint particular people, but actually have it coming from the very top leadership down and try to have it infused throughout all the layers of the organization. So one of the things that I and many others who do research in this area have been studying now for a couple of decades is, okay, when and how is it that you can maximize the benefits and minimize the challenges of a diverse workforce? And so what it comes down to is if you have leadership that values DE&I, leadership that values people and values learning and values differences and sees those differences as an opportunity rather than a threat, sees those differences as a wonderful resource of information that can allow us to do better and make better decisions, better serve in terms of products, services, innovation, whatever it is that we do. If you have that sort of leadership and that gets infused into the culture and people begin to want and to see and to appreciate diversity as an opportunity, the research clearly shows that if a group of people approach a situation with the mindset that our diversity makes us better and our diversity is going to make us more productive and more innovative, that becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. And the research is clear that is in fact what you get. Anytime you have a diverse group of people working on a task that requires creativity or a task that is at all difficult and requires a lot of information, which is most of the projects that people work on in organizations, the key is that if you can do so in a very respectful and productive manner, work together professionally and respectfully so that the differences are accepted and the differences are seen as an advantage, a way to learn and to be better. As long as you have that professional demeanor, then you can mitigate some of the conflicts that sometimes come up. If you just think about it intuitively, the minute you have people with differences of opinion, differences of personality, differences even in their background and training, you're going to have different perspectives. You're going to have conflict in the sense that people may not agree on how to proceed or what the best thing to do is, right? So diversity can lead to things like conflict. It can also lead to a much longer and more difficult decision-making process, because with differences comes a lot of what we call information richness. But what the research shows is that if you work through that information and you take the time to work through and process all that information that you get from the diverse team, yeah, it may take you a little longer to make a decision, but in the end, your decision is more creative, you're going to be more productive, and your organization can be more innovative and ultimately perform much better, as long as the culture and the leadership and the accountability are favorable for diversity. If those things aren't there, that's probably all those studies that you see with negative effect sizes or no effect sizes saying, hey, it doesn't make a difference or it actually hurts. There's probably something about the leadership or the culture. There's something in that organization that's not right and not allowing you to get the maximum benefit from the diversity. And that's why this is so complicated. It's very nuanced.
You just nailed it. I mean, there's a number of articles in the Harvard Business Review about diversity, education or diversity being a problem for companies. But I think that you just outlined it beautifully. If it starts at the top as a priority, then it will trickle its way down. But the leadership has to recognize this is not a sprint, this is a marathon, right? Changing culture takes years, may take 5 years, may take 10 years, but you have to stay in there pitching and catching. I'm gonna go back to Michele, and there's a question here. What should be the priority or come first, diversity, equity, or inclusion? But before you answer that, there's somebody that wanted to know in the question and answer, Michele, you suggested to read books on DEI. Can you please name a couple of them?
Oh gosh.
While you're thinking, I'm going to say, for someone who's a physician, I read the Harvard Business Review.
Well,
I learn a lot about diversity and inclusion techniques from reading you guys' journals. Now, I'm not sure I want y'all to read the New England Journal of Medicine on virology or cardiology, but I certainly do read your Harvard Business Review, and I have the books on leadership and innovation. Those are really important things for, I don't care who you are, a physician leader, hospital leader, or Nissan leader. Those are really useful. I'm sorry, I interrupted you there.
No, not at all. There's so many books. Right now, I'm engrossed in the 1619 project. That's what I'm reading right now. But there's a book, I think it's called How to Be an Inclusive Leader. That was a really good book that I'd recommend. There is a book called What Women of Color, I'm going to get the title wrong. I think it's What Women of Color Need to Know in Order to Succeed in the Workplace. That was a good one as well. These are more recent books that I've read. but I'm more than happy to jot down and.
Yeah, you can. Yeah, we'll pass that back in the chat. So the question was, if you look at priorities, what should come first? And this may be a loaded question, but that's the question.
It's loaded for me.
First, I'm gonna diverse first, equity second, or inclusion third, or what order would you agree?
Well, I think naturally diversity is probably top of the list, right? Because you really do have to have people from all different backgrounds in order to lend their expertise, their skill set, their perspectives on DEI. But when we talk about diversity, I always challenge people to clearly identify what diversity means for their organization. Right. So for some organizations, it just may be, oh, we have different people from ethnic backgrounds, or we have people from, different genders, or, but how about abilities? How about age? How about spiritual beliefs? So let's not just lump diversity as if it's just, oh, I have diversity. Diversity means so many different things to so many different people. So
cognitive diversity, an artist, as you say, or a poet. Yeah.
Right. Abilities. So I always challenge people to not just think of diversity as just, one thing. And a lot of times they want to just put it on race and gender. But I challenge people to really think about what diversity really means for their organization. My personal belief is that, diversity, you could put lipstick on a pig, but it's still a pig, right? So diversity is, you got to have that inclusive part. And I think that's next. And you have.
How is that achieved though? How is it? So you've got.
I think you have.
So here you have this giant applicant pool. You've made it diverse. Mm-hmm. You've got this door people have to walk through to enter into your corporation in the C-suite. Mm-hmm. What does that inclusive filter look like?
So it includes. Sure, it includes empowering, those diverse members of your team, right? It includes it includes making them part of the C-suite. It makes them part of the team that can influence policy and decision making, and it's inclusive. It's making sure that they're part of those teams that make a difference for your organization, and are empowered to make a difference for your organization without fear of retaliation. And from there, I think it helps to develop a culturally rich and empowered organization. And I also think from there, I think the equity comes. Those are just my thoughts. I think that when you get a diverse group and you include them and put them in decision-making roles and make them empowered to make decisions that's in the best interest of the organization, then I think that they naturally will work to make sure that equity is there. And equity, of course, looks a lot of different ways as well. But I think that the question as far as what order, I think it's diversity, and then it goes to inclusion, and then it goes to equity.
Right. It's fascinating. I've just looked at something here recently about people who've really diversified in a significant way their applicant pool, but they still aren't accepting people of color or different backgrounds. And one of the things you have to include next in that, and I'll let María jump into that, is looking at inclusive education as a methodology. You have to have people kind of pull back from their own unconscious or implicit biases about how they view someone different from them, and ask themselves specific questions. Am I actually not voting for this person because they don't look like me, or is my culture in our room when we're doing applicant review all tied up around this person isn't a fit? And a fit is a great way to exclude people who don't look like you. So you have to remove certain code words, certain adjectives out of that applicant review system. Otherwise, you'll be caught up in what's been happening for the last 20 and 30 years. María, any comments about that? You want to jump in?
Oh, I totally agree about the fit issue. That's something that we talk about in the human resources class. I've got some evidence in that class based on a very prominent meta-analysis that basically says, is fit a good predictor of future job performance? The answer is no, it's not. It's a good predictor of future job attitudes, how happy somebody might be at the organization, which can then indirectly predict maybe how well they stay, or how engaged they are, how motivated, which could eventually tell you something about performance. But it's not a very good predictor of performance, and it's actually used as a way to filter people out that you may just feel uncomfortable about. Well, the reason you might feel uncomfortable about them is because maybe there's something about them that's deep down, something that you're prejudiced against. And that's the whole point of implicit bias, is there may be something about this candidate that I just don't understand, but somehow I have a feeling when I see them that, it makes me uncomfortable, or whatever the case may be. It just may be that the person you're looking at is so different from the person that you have decided that you've seen through observation, repeated observation in society. You've learned to imagine a certain kind of person in a certain kind of role. And when you're confronted with someone who looks completely different from your subconscious idea of who should be in that role, well, golly, there's something that I just can't put my finger on, but it makes me uncomfortable. And I'm just not sure about this candidate. And why don't we have a second look? Because I want to be absolutely sure that this person is the right. That's implicit bias coming out in the selection process.
It really, you nailed it. It really helps to have kind of a true educational process around that for your hiring team, so that they ask the question, they remain rigid to the rules of what you're looking for. I'm looking for a candidate that has this skill set, this skill set, this skill set. And if you come back to that, then you keep pushing the fit out of the way, or that, there's something about this person I just don't feel right about. That's not an acceptable reason to exclude someone. So I really appreciate that. That question actually falls back on Michele. In your experience, does diversity education, like unconscious bias training and issues like microaggressions, is it valuable? Does it assist you in your work?
Oh, absolutely. There are two quotes that I always go back to in my head for a whole lot of reasons. But one is, you don't know what you don't know, right? And the other thing is that, you when you know better, you do better, and while as simple as they are, they communicate so much. And again, I go back to, you can never go wrong with educating yourself, and especially in this area. And it's amazing. I've participated in so many DEI discussions over the last year, and it is so warming, and it's so amazing when you see that light bulb go off, when you see that person go, oh, I get it now. I'm understanding kind of, what all this conversation is about. And I challenge individuals to first be open-minded, don't make assumptions. And also to check your privilege, right? And think about things that you don't have to worry about on a day-to-day basis. Really take time to examine your privilege. And we all have privileges, right? We have the privilege right now of having the technology and the resources to be able to communicate to each other the way we are today. And then the other thing that I would encourage, when we're talking about all of these new terms to think about and study and learn about, code switching is one. I encourage the audience that if they have not done a lot of research about code switching, to kind of understanding what that's all about, which is basically adjusting your speech, your appearance, and how you bring yourself to an organization to make sure everyone else is comfortable. And that, you can imagine how much stress that could put on an individual. And so when you make yourself aware of that, you become more sensitive about it. And of course that helps with having a strong cultural environment. And the other thing that, that I won't delve into, but we talk about being an ally, these days as well. And I could talk all day about that. But the one thing I will say about being an ally is that, that is really, look at it as a verb. It's an action word, it's just not a noun. And so I would also encourage the audience that when you learn more about, things like microaggressiveness and those things like that, you can be more of a supportive ally. And it is, once again, an action word.
That's great. Appreciate that. Chandra, any comments on this? This is a key topic, important topic. Anything to add?
I mean, I completely concur with everything that Michele said. Some of those things came out in some of the listening sessions that we have had. We certainly include training as part of our DEI roadmap. We ensured that 100% of our employees in our region completed unconscious bias training. We have plans for future training. It's certainly opens people's eyes. So you can't always change a person's beliefs, but you can certainly change access to information that drives those beliefs, right? So the education is certainly key. And it's just one of those things that helps place your organization at least on an even playing field when it relates to understanding diversity and some of the issues like the microaggressions that employees deal with.
Great, thank you. María, I'm coming back to you on issue of disability. Disability is often overlooked piece of DEI. In a world where more people are working remote than ever, how does that open up more doors for those with disabilities to not only be included, but equal?
So this one's close to me. I personally have a disability, and I have an accommodation through the university, which gives me the flexibility to work from home, which I think is a very, wonderful arrangement that I have access to. I think for other people, COVID-19 and the pandemic, this Zoom technology that we're using right now that everyone has become proficient with over the last couple of years, I think it has been a game changer for people with a disability. If someone has any sort of accessibility kind of issue with work, any kind of condition that can flare up periodically over time or is permanent, having the flexibility to be able to work in a remote arrangement, I think is tremendous. The research is very, very clear that in terms of educational attainment and occupational attainment, people with a disability are at an unfair disadvantage compared to people without a disability. And it's partly because the work arrangements are not flexible enough to give them that access. And this has demonstrated to us over the last 2 years that there are so many jobs that can be done remotely. And so what I would say for organizations and for all the many, many managers that are on the line is, now that we know we can work remotely in so many different kinds of positions, I really hope that at the end of this COVID-19 pandemic, the door doesn't then slam on people with disabilities and people become more rigid once again and say, oh no, you have to be in person to do this particular position, when we've seen the evidence over the last couple of years that many jobs can be done remotely, which would be a tremendous way to level the playing field for people who do have a disability. And I really hope that we've learned to be more flexible and to use flexible work arrangements and accommodations to make the workforce better and more diverse and to give people opportunity. And that's the purpose of the ADA, is to level the playing field. Now that we have Zoom and evidence that so many jobs can be done remotely, I hope that will continue.
Great, thank you so much. Chandra, kind of a two-part question. It's kind of really almost the same, look at from a different way. How can an individual in an organization be a leader in DEI, even if their organization doesn't have a true EDI initiative? And then someone asked in the chat, what is the challenging aspect of introducing and implementing a DEI program that's brand new in an organization? So if you start out and you don't have DEI, and somebody wants to really be a champion and push it along in that organization, and then some new organization says, hey, I want DEI, but I don't know how to implement it and get it started.
So I would say that Michele touched on some of the points I would make as it relates to answering this question. The very first thing is to research DEI. You really need to do the research, understand what those three terms mean, how those terms, how they interact, how you have to have a strategy that addresses each of these in your organization. From our standpoint, we can hire all the diverse talent in the world, but if we don't have a culture that is inclusive, a culture that makes them feel respected and valued, and gives them the opportunity to come to work as their authentic selves, then we don't have the success and we don't have a successful DEI strategy. I would say the next thing is to find allies, right? So this is very difficult work. It is very hard to just go in there and try to put forth a strategy or an initiative. So, especially if you're doing it alone. So find allies, know who is supportive. Certainly look for someone at the leadership level who's already demonstrating and practicing DEI in their role. So if you see someone out there and they are doing it well, they are most likely an ally and someone who will stand with you to start an initiative in your organization. As well as knowing who the allies are, you also need to know who the objectors are, right? You want to know who those people are, know what some of those objections could be, and be prepared to address some of those. Then think about your company. How can DEI help your company achieve its goals, right? So, from a Nissan standpoint, we don't just look at the fact that it's the right thing to do when absolutely it is the right thing to do, but we also know that it's a business imperative, right? We know that it has a positive impact on our results when we have employees that are engaged, who can be their authentic selves and who can come forward with ideas to help us drive our business forward. And once you kind of know who those allies are, and you truly understand it, try to bring together that group of committed members and think about, how you can start it in your company. Maybe and set some goals. Maybe it's training. We talked a little bit about training. Maybe that's a good first start, right? Maybe it's inclusive discussions, right? So maybe there's research that you can do on videos or something that you can put out and ask employees to start, giving their thoughts on those in order to create that sort of environment where an employee might feel comfortable expressing themselves. And then you just have to, find the time and really commit to it as well. And, once people see you out there doing the work, and once you do the things to get more people talking about DEI and you continue to encourage those discussions, that's kind of how you can really bring it forward to higher leadership levels. Ultimately, you want to get to that highest leadership level to ensure that there is support on pushing those initiatives into the organization.
Perfect. So summarize, look for the champions.
Yes.
And they're out there and you'll find them. You have to look for them at the water cooler, look for them in the lunchroom. They're the ones that you need to work with to start building your coalition of allies. Figure out who's frenemies, enemies, and true enemies along the way. And try to, with your guile and your skill and all of the tools that you've learned about from reading all those journals that Michele is talking about, you'll learn to be able to help people understand the power of diversity, inclusion, and equity, right?
Dr. Churchwell,
absolutely.
Let me also add that I think people would be surprised at the little things that can make a big difference, right? Just, if there's an inappropriate joke or inappropriate comment, just mentioning, hey, are you, that might not be the right thing to say, or words of encouragement. I had a colleague text me right before the call and just said, excited about, you delivering the message today. I know it's going to be great and it's so needed. Things like that, can make all the difference in the world. And when other people see, and it's almost like sometimes we're back in 5th and 6th grade, right? But when the cool kid says it's cool, then other people come on board and they join in the fight, so to speak. They join in and find ways to be supportive. And you'd be surprised. Everyone doesn't have to be the chief, right? Everyone doesn't have to be out front. People make a big difference by being the cheerleaders behind the scenes. And so I would encourage anyone out there listening and trying to figure out how can I make a difference. Again, being an ally is a verb, and send those encouraging notes and speak up, when you have an opportunity to. And when that top CEO asks you for your opinion, don't just think of yourself. Think about the others in the organization that are disenfranchised for whatever reason, and think about answering from other perspectives than just your own.
Great, thank you. I'm going to move to María. We're getting close to the end here. I have to pay attention to the time. María, this is kind of really, to me, the question at the top of the pyramid. How do you know when you've achieved success in DEI? What does it look like when it's deeply embedded in the ethos of an organization? What does your research tell us? What are the kind of metrics you start seeing pouring out of those companies?
When it's embedded in the organization, those are the best performing organizations from my own research. So to give you an example, and this kind of goes back to the question of inclusion versus diversity versus equity, when you have all of it. In this study that we have that's just been published in Academy of Management Journal, what we find is when you have, and this was about racial diversity, we were looking at racial diversity in the very top of the organization among senior managers versus in the lower level management. And so this goes back to something that Chandra said also. If you don't have diversity throughout the whole organization, that's basically occupational segregation, right? Where you have certain people in certain positions that are very elite and high level, and certain people may be clustered in certain positions at the bottom of the organization. That's not a nice place to be either, because there you have diversity, you may have some inclusion, but do people actually have a chance to work all the way up the organizational hierarchy into that C-suite, into the very top management team? When it's working, you have a very diverse pipeline of people who are all talented, and that's how you build a really strong candidate pool. You select people into the organization without bias or prejudice based on their skills and abilities, and they're allowed to succeed without impediment based on their characteristics and demographics. And what we actually found in this study, of the entire S&P 500 firms, and also separately looking just at the high-tech industry, the best performing and most productive firms in the entire high-tech industry and in the entire S&P 500 were the firms that had higher racial diversity in the middle management of the organization and the senior management of the organization. So you've got diversity embedded throughout the entire organization. You have it in the culture. So people automatically have a positive, inclusive learning culture. They can bring themselves to work. They want to learn from one another. They see it as an opportunity, and everyone is allowed to grow and thrive. And in the entire S&P 500, those are the top performing firms.
That is spectacular. Boy, what a great closing note. That kind of puts the ribbon around the box, doesn't it, guys? I really want to thank Michele and Chandra and María for this really engaging, entertaining, but mostly educating evening. We have all learned something. I hope this event has offered you new ideas, confirmed your own ideas, and maybe even brought you some novel approaches to tough problems in your own company and firms. I want to thank you all for attending this event, and I hope to do this again with this great team. They are phenomenal. They make me look better. So thank you again, and please have a great night. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Thank you.